All right, welcome to Rapid Fire Manufacturing. Today we have Sam Thevanayagam, and Sam is the kind of leader who sees challenges as opportunities. As the CEO of Parts Life Inc., he's helping manufacturers tackle big problems like obsolescence and sustainability while driving innovation. He's also passionate about mentoring the next generation and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in our industry. So, Sam, I appreciate you joining. I love the stuff that you're doing in the industry.
Thank you, David. It's actually an honor and a privilege for me to be on your show.
Thank you. So you've worked a lot in solving challenges around obsolete parts. What's one lesson manufacturers tend to overlook when it comes to old components or bringing components to life?
Yeah. So, David, you talked a little bit about leadership and we talked a little bit about constraints, right? And I think, as leaders, it's our responsibility to work in constrained areas, right? So, I think it's important for leaders to make sure that they understand the constraints in the organization and they're working those constraints, right? And so it's interesting that for me, when I pivoted away from automotive, which I knew very well, and started to work with the Department of Defense, I saw that in their supply chain, a big issue was this lack of parts that were needed for fleet readiness. And if you think about it, we are a country that a lot of people depend on, a lot of other countries depend on, and our own country depends on making sure that our fleets are always ready for the fight, right? And so it's not an offensive posture, it's a defensive posture. And so just like we found out with the spy balloon, right? So if we are not able to defend our homeland, if somebody can actually penetrate our defenses, that's not good for our country, right? So the work that I do is directly proportionate to making sure that the homeland is safe. So it's very important work. I call it dangerous, difficult, and disruptive work that we do. And somebody actually called it running with scissors. Right? So when you're running with scissors, you have to embrace risk. If you don't want risk, don't leave the house. Right? But as a manufacturer, in making these obsolete parts, there's a lot of variables, right? And we got to make sure that we are reducing the variable. It's like a golf swing, right? The less variability you have in a golf swing, the better you are. We got to make sure we take the variability out of the process and make sure that we are making it the same way every single time. And so if you think about obsolete parts, it's an issue where it's high mix, low volume, right? And so if you look at automotive manufacturing, where you're making thousands of something, right? It's not difficult to reduce the variability, right? Because you're making thousands of something. You're looking at things like toolware. You're looking at things like, runouts to make sure that you're controlling those tolerances so that you're making the part the same way every single time. But when you're doing very low mix, when you're doing low volumes, when you're making 10 of something or when you're making 15 of something, that the work is more like being an artisan rather than being in manufacturing. So there are some different rules to the game, and it's important for us to understand that and to be able to control our manufacturing process so that we are controlling the variables even when you're making 10 or 15 or 20 of something.
Wow, I like the golf analogy too. That's really powerful. Now, how do you discover some of these constraints? Is this something you have to accumulate over experience of working in different industries, or is this something that you can go out and kind of develop and learn, on your own?
I think it's a bit of both, right? And so if you think about even in my organization, I bought Deval Manufacturing out of bankruptcy 7 years ago. I have quite a few 60-somethings, 60-year-old peoples, north of 60 who still work for us, right? And it's important that I am able to get that conventional wisdom, right, to our young people. I've actually coined a term. I call it unconscious competency. I have a lot of people who work for us that have unconscious competency. They have learned how to do these things over the years. And then the neat thing about unconscious competency is you're an artisan, you're an expert on something. Not so the downside of being an artisan is that it's very difficult to replicate. It's very difficult to teach. It's very difficult to rinse and repeat. So part of what I'm working on is making sure that I am doing this right now. So I'm not going to talk about it like I'm already successful, but at least I have recognized that there is an issue of making sure that I'm teaming the older person with the younger person so that some learning can take place, so that there is some teaching that is going on, so that the art of what we're talking about is not lost. And so as we talk about the resurgence of manufacturing, it's very important that even this art part of it is captured in such a way that our younger people, who are coming into manufacturing are learning, right? And so one of the things that I have worked on is making manufacturing more sexy, because manufacturing, unfortunately, doesn't have a good rap. And so when I go to these high schools and when there is a call to action, I always am wearing these dark glasses looking like Deion Sanders, talking to them about the benefits of manufacturing. And I've been able to convert a few. Our youngest person that works for us is 18 years old. He grew up in inner city Philadelphia, doesn't come from a very good household from a home perspective. But on the other hand, we've surrounded him with a lot of love and made him a person that belongs in our organization. He's 18 years old and he is currently picking up a lot of our machines. So it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
Manufacturing has the ability to transform lives, and so that's what makes me wake up every morning. Today I am a lot more motivated by the needs of people out there and the hunger of people who want to succeed and who want to create generational wealth and stuff like that. And so as I meet with these young people, it's important for me to kind of mentor them along the way and eventually help them to buy their own house, and stuff like that. I read a book many years ago. It's probably been about 20 years ago since I read this book. It's called The Mystery of Capital. And it talks about the fact that in a capitalistic society, the number one way that you create collateral is through home ownership. And that's been true in my life, So when I bootstrapped Parts Life, sold my home, downsized and put that capital, the appreciation of capital into starting my company. In 17, when I bootstrapped and bought, I didn't bootstrap at that point, I bought a company out of bankruptcy. I used my home as a collateral. So this has been true in my life. And I want to make sure that the people that are working for us have that same opportunity and have that same ability to be able to do that.
Sam, that's phenomenal what you're doing too. And to see, it's clear your passion is very clear. And any one person that we can bring into the industry is a win, but it's people like you drawing them in. People aren't just going to, look online and just say, hey, here's a nice industry to join. We have to make them aware that this is a phenomenal industry where you can support your family, you can grow, you can be an entrepreneur, you can do all these things. So I love the fact that you're doing that, because that's something near and dear to me is workforce development and bringing people into manufacturing.
Yep.
Sustainability is this kind of buzzword now. So you've been focused on, doing this for years. What's one practical way manufacturers can start making an impact today without overhauling everything?
Yeah, so, it's very interesting. The name Parts Life, actually, I borrowed from a company in Europe, an organization in Europe, actually called their organization Parts Life. And basically, in the European Union, they were asking OEMs to take on responsibility from cradle to grave. And so basically, they were saying, if you create something, then you are responsible for that life or that asset. So when I started Parts Life, I actually borrowed that name from this European entity. It wasn't a profit-making entity. It was an entity that was more like a public-private partnership that was actually working with the European Union. So I called my company Parts Life Inc., right? And so, it's very interesting to use a Bible verse. Jesus said the poor will always be with you. And very profound, right? For Jesus to say the poor will always be with you. And that is, I don't care how much you serve the poor, unfortunately, that segment of people are not going to go away. And so that's the way I look at the obsolescence issue, right? There will always be an obsolescence issue. I don't care where technology goes, where AI goes, where machine learning goes. We may be able to make it a more predictable thing, but on the other hand, it's not something that's going to go away. And so it's very important for us, for OEMs and for primes and for the DoD to recognize that this is not a problem that we're going to be able to completely delete, but we need to learn to manage that. So we need to understand it as a constraint. And if you look at one of the principles of theories, constraint says you gotta manage that constraint. So you gotta organize around it, and you gotta figure out a way to be able to solve those issues. And one thing I can tell you is on high mix, low volume, right? I have actually briefed even the Senate Armed Services Committee, and I tell them that if you look at public companies, private equity companies, they don't have an economic model to be able to solve these problems, these high mix, low volume problems. So it's a typical problem that only small businesses have the ability and the cost structure and the cost models to solve. My message to these large primes and to organic capabilities is, look at small business as a way to be able to solve that, and figure out a way to build a relationship that's more strategic, not a tactical one, right? Because if you build a relationship based on transaction, it's not going to go anywhere. Right. But on the other hand, if you take a strategic approach to it that says, listen, I am good at this, but here are some places where I'm going to bring you along as a way to be able to work on this program. I want you to work on this platform, and you have a strategic relationship that knows exactly who is going to do what work, right? And I've taken my team to see an orchestra play, and it's beautiful that they are all singing off the same, they're all performing off the same sheet of music, right? And so it's important to develop a playbook, right? When a prime goes into a big weapon system. I was at the F-35 conference last week in Salt Lake City, right? The largest and the most expensive weapon system, and probably the deadliest weapon system known to mankind. When you have that kind of a weapon system, while it's important to think in terms of production, think in terms of the users, it's also important to think in terms of sustainment and what is the capability that you're going to bring to the small businesses that can actually do some of that work for you. Can you predict it, right? The more you can predict it and the more that you can respond to it, right? And the more that you can provide ownership to somebody to solve that problem, it's going to get taken care of. So that's the issue, right? And some of that work could be work that has to be done by an artisan, right? So let me give you an example. A couple of days ago, I was with a buddy of mine who got his shoes resold, right? You're not going to hear too much of that anymore, right? Because we live in a throwaway society, right? Where resoling of a pair of shoes is not really heard of, right? But you still find pockets of people, cobblers, who can actually still resole shoes. And so it's very important that that capability, that capacity, that understanding, that competency doesn't go away, right? And so the only way it doesn't go away is if you give it some juice, if you give it some oxygen, right? And so, as we become a bigger company, it's very important for us to continue to protect that group of artisans that we still need to be able to do that work for us, right? So, or you have to bring it in-house. So, for instance, we are thinking about bringing some heat treating. We just talked a little bit about heat treating before we jumped on this call. We are planning on bringing some of that in-house as a way to be able to control our own destiny, as a way to be able to control our own variability and that kind of stuff.
That's awesome. And Sam, we are out of time here. Stay tuned for more rapid fire manufacturing. Sam, always a pleasure talking with you, and thank you for the wisdom that you share with the industry.